Hi all, Tony Bartels here with VIN Foundation. We've got another update for you. This is April 3rd, 2020. So in regards to changes that have been made to your student loans due to the recent CARES Act, the legislation passed by Congress this past Friday on March 27th, we wanted to give you an update on what is going to happen or what has been happening on your student loans. The good news is you don't have to do anything. These things are already happening, and you do not have to request or even call your loan servicer to ask about them. They are going to be implemented automatically. So we have updated our blog with the information that the Department of Education released on April 1st. So they provided a little bit of guidance on their website and also to the loan servicers who are servicing your federally held student loans. We have summarized that here. Again, you do not have to do anything, and I'm going to show you exactly how that's been working because I have some federal student loans that are managed by Great Lakes, and I'm going to log in here. And my interest rate has been set to 0, and the payment has been already suspended. So since the CARES Act went into effect on the 27th, and since the guidance has been provided earlier this week, some of the loan servicers have already been able to implement these changes. So you can see that they are labeling this a forbearance. I'm not a huge fan of that language. The law actually calls this a suspension, and there is a distinction there. But the good news is I was using revised pay-as-you-earn prior to this suspension taking effect, which means I will still get credit for that time spent during this suspension towards forgiveness. And based on the information we have available right now, when the suspension is over, I will resume again in revised pay-as-you-earn without my unpaid interest being capitalized. But we can see here that I don't have any payment right now. I can click on my details to get a little bit more information here on my student loans. And this is where I'm going to see that I have a 0% interest rate on my 2 outstanding balances. And I also have no payment due, at least through the duration of the suspension, which is currently slated to end at the end of September. So that's good news. I did not have to do anything. This was all done for me. I do want to come back to the blog post here. If you're the caveat is that you do have to have federally owned student loans, right? So all direct loans are owned by the Department of Education. Some federal family education loans are, and some Perkins loans are. If you're not quite sure if your loans qualify, you want to come over here to studentaid.gov, log in. This is going to be your same username and password that you use to apply for student loans, or if you're using income-driven repayment, this is the same username and password that you use to apply for your income-driven repayment plan and document your income when you have to do that. But I'm going to come over here to my details, and I'm going to download my student aid data file. Right, this is what we used to refer to as the National Student Loan Data System file, or NSLDS file. Now it's under the studentaid.gov portal. I'm going to download this information. It's going to save it to my computer. And I'm going to come over then to the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool. Right, so we have also a link to that in the blog. If I go to the My Student Loans tool, I can take that student aid data file and upload it into the tool that we created on VIN Foundation Student Debt Center to help you make sense of your student loan. And this is a really good illustration of some of the functionality in here. Not only does it give you some summary information that you can find useful for managing your student loans on a long-term basis, but here we can see some useful information that will pertain to this COVID-19 student loan repayment suspension. So first thing I want to note is if you're due to renew or you're using an income-driven repayment plan, you'll have a renewal date. You still want to satisfy those renewal documentation if you are in a renewal period, right? So I had been in a renewal period, and ironically, just as they were suspending my payments, I was due to start my new schedule of payments based on my income documentation that I sent them earlier in February. But since it's been suspended, that's not going to get taken into effect yet. I'm still counted to be in revised pay-as-you-earn, but I had already sent them that information, right? So I did supply that information, they accepted it, and it was due to recalculate when that payment was going to take effect. But in here, I wanted to highlight a couple of different things. So we've got this loan servicer tab, and what you're looking for are this Department of Ed, right? So this is how I know that my direct loans that are with Great Lakes are owned by the Department of Education, right? So I know that they qualify for the 0% interest rate as well as the payment suspension. It's not reflected here in this file, but it is reflected on my loan servicer portal. The small balance that I have that are family federal education loans or FEL loans, FEL program loans, those are with Navient, but they do not say Department of Ed, right? So these loans are not owned by the Department of Education, thus they are not eligible for the 0% interest rate or the payment suspension, right? So you want to upload that file, and any grouping that you see here that says Department of Ed in front of it before the loan servicer, those are federally owned student loans. The Navient ones in this example are not. They are still a type of federal student loan. They're just not owned by the Department of Ed. Thus, they do not fall under the scope of this particular legislation. All right. Another thing I want to highlight on the federal student aid page, they do have a good coronavirus update going as well. So let me go ahead and log out of this. And when you come to studentaid.gov, you've got this coronavirus and forbearance information page. And there's actually some really good information on here. There's a link to this on the blog as well. But there's some really good information, particularly for borrowers, on the impacts of your student loans. And we really summarize this, but there's some good information and confirmation that you will get credit towards forgiveness if you're using income-driven repayment during the suspension, as well as public service loan forgiveness. If you're using income-driven repayment and you were qualifying towards public service loan forgiveness before the suspension took effect, that time will still count towards your forgiveness that you're working towards. So take a look at this. If you still have some questions, we are doing a free webinar this coming Wednesday, April 8th. You can register for that. There's no charge, but we're going to be covering what these latest legislative changes mean to your student loans while you're in repayment, right? So for the most part, this has really impacted folks that are in repayment now. We want to make sure that people get their questions answered, and we cover the basics like knowing that you don't have to do anything, right? Your loan servicer is going to do this with you, and also how to identify whether or not this applies to the student loans that you have. So register for that webinar. It's free. We're going to go through this information, answer all your questions, and then stay tuned to this blog as we're going to continue to update as we learn more and more. So stay safe, stay tuned, and we'll hope to see you on Wednesday at the webinar.